All right. Well, welcome everyone. We'll get started. So hello, and thank you for joining us on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. At least it's beautiful here in southern Vermont. I hope it's beautiful for wherever you're tuning in from today. I think most of our people who registered were relatively local. But I know, we get folks from all across the country coming into our presentations. My name is Dina Mallory, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Bennington Museum. A few points of Zoom etiquette before we get started. Please keep your video off and yourself muted during the program, and I recommend that you set your view to full screen and speaker view. That'll give you the best viewing experience. And Michael, I believe we have potentially a couple of folks calling in today as well. So we'll do the best we can for them. And you can use the chat feature in Zoom at any time during the program to ask questions of our presenter. And we'll also have a opportunity at the end of the program for questions and answers as well. But Michael's very open to you kind of asking questions as we go, and he'll jump on and answer those. We will be recording this program, and we'll make the recording available on the museum's YouTube channel and on our website as well. And of course, I'll be sending a copy to Michael, and maybe he'll get it up on their website too. So today, I am very pleased to introduce Michael Clough. Michael's passion is environmental education. And if you ever have a chance to participate in one of his live animal presentations, I encourage you to do so. They are just great. And I certainly encourage you to visit him at the Southern Vermont Natural History Museum, which is located at the Hogback Mountain Overlook in West Marlborough, Vermont. And that's where Michael has worked for the last 12 years. He is the managing director there and describes his role as grant writing to plumbing to eagle training to program development. I think many of us who work in this nonprofit museum field can relate to that, always wearing many hats. Michael also works with the Four Winds Nature Institute, where he helps adult volunteers learn to present hands-on natural history programming to area schools. And he has his own business called Rockhopper Outdoor Education, through which he promotes environmental and science education through direct programming, as well as through partnerships with other individuals and organizations. Like I said, this is his passion. And now I will turn it over to him. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much for having us on today. And yeah, looking forward to it. So I know we just had a couple more people join in. So with that great introduction, I'm already checking off the first thing on my list. But for those of you maybe you're not familiar with the museum, as you just heard, we also do a lot of outreach programs. So we can be found traveling not only in southern Vermont, but into some of the adjoining states as well. We were in New York yesterday, and for the most part, those programs are live animal programs. I mean, yes, we do go outdoors and do some science exploration, guided hikes, things like that. But most of us know us from, me standing there with a hawk on my hand, or someone holding our big friendly snapping turtle. And that really seems to be, especially with the outreach, where the interest lies for our programming. So it's kind of neat tonight to be looking at something very different, and really more what the museum was founded on. And that's our historic natural history collection. We're going to actually take a little tour around the collection here when we get going. First, though, we're kind of talk a little bit about the history of taxidermy, because that's really our natural history collection is primarily taxidermy. And it's something that was put together by a gentleman named Lumen, who lived across the river over here in Winchester, New Hampshire for most of his life. And he was what was known at the time as a taxidermist / naturalist. Not a combination we hear all that often nowadays, but something that really, when you think of the conservationists of the late 18 and early 1900s, it fits right in. I suppose first, though, we should think about what is taxidermy. What does that really mean, right? Very often, the thing that pops into our heads right away is that, that deer head mounted on the wall, the idea of a trophy mount. And that's definitely a big part of taxidermy. And I think for most of us, that's our firsthand exposure to it. That Uncle Bill got that beautiful buck mounted. But taxidermy's roots really are more in science, more tied to exploration. And at least as we're thinking of what we all think of as taxidermy, if you really want to look into it, if you really want to dig back, the history of taxidermy goes all the way back to the Stone Age, because ultimately what it is preserving animal remains. So, imagine back 8,000 years ago, some Cro-Magnon hunter moving north through Europe. That was cold. We are not physically built to deal with that cold. So those folks had figured out long before that they could use hides of the animals they'd killed to keep warm. And if you can imagine taking the hide off the deer and throwing it over your head, a little gross. Yeah. So they wanted to find ways to make that more usable and also to allow that hide to last. And a lot of techniques that were developed in the Stone Age are still valid ways to preserve hides. A lot of folks now are interested in those earlier survival skills and can tell you about brain tanning. Yeah, the chemicals in your brain, well, maybe not your brain, but an animal's brain are suitable for tanning the hide, to keep that leather soft and supple, to preserve it. Isn't that weird? And of course, many things, many plants can be used, minerals can be used. That actually the term tanning in some ways can be tied to tannic acid, like we might find in oak trees. You've ever bit on an acorn, you get that bitter taste of an acorn. Those are the tannic acids, and they can be used as part of the process to tan those hides, which would allow that early hunter to take a wolf pelt and use it to keep warm. And this really is, I mean, the most amazing material for keeping warm. Now today, of course, we have synthetics that matches it, but on the live wolf, this fur is such good insulation. When they're curled up on a snowy day, they don't have enough body heat lost through that fur to melt the snow. Snow will literally pile up on their backs instead of melting. So an phenomenal insulation, and something that our ancestors, through figuring out how to preserve hides, really were able to take advantage of that themselves and expand into colder climates than a wild human really should be in. That really formed the foundations of what we think of as taxidermy, that display of animals. And not everybody loves the taxidermy, and that's one reason why, here at the museum, we diversify the exhibits a little bit, because somebody might come in and go, dead animals, and keep going to look at the bald eagles, the live ones, and then we can kind of talk to them and understand some of the value of this collection today. Still on our history, though. That kind of modern taxidermy of preserving the whole animal for the sake of having the animal really hit its stride in the 1600s. There are examples from 100 years or more prior to that of whole animals being preserved in a state that some of them, like there's a crocodile in Europe that was preserved in the 1500s that is still on exhibit today. And they were using the kind of techniques that the ancient Egyptians used for mummification. Those kind of went by the wayside, though, in favor of stuffing an animal, right? We've all heard that, right? Stuffed animals. That's something that, for the most part, taxidermists don't like. But it came from those first attempts at preserving an animal. When someone might travel to a faraway land and they want to bring those exotic birds or animals back, they would skin it, tan that hide, preserve that hide, and then just fill the body with fluff. And you'd end up with something kind of like this. I mean, we're not going to think this is a live hawk, are we? But we can look at the feet, we can see the tail, we can look at all the wing feathers, the shape of the beak. You know, for us to learn about what this animal is, especially back in the 1600s, it was actually a very valued way for folks at that time to transport specimens back, say from the Indies or here in North America to Europe. And you can tell, like we have a few of these over here. You know? What's this? I can't hear you, sorry. Yeah, I mean, you guys know, right? It's a cardinal. Blue jay, same way. And you will find the natural history museums around the world that have been in existence for centuries, college, universities, large biology departments, they will have drawers still today full of what we typically call study skins. These animals that are just skins preserved and stuffed with cotton, something like that, just so that we can look at the animal and get some basic physiological information from. So also in the 1600s, that idea of displaying these animals came into vogue. And back then they did it a little differently, actually a lot differently than we do today. And very often they would actually use the skeleton of the animal to build a framework to then stuff the hide over. So can you imagine that? You've got your, you know, your big bucket of deer bones. Like, well, all right, well, here's the head. We'll put that on top, and I don't know, that's the hip, yeah. And having to put all this together, kind of the way we typically display dinosaur fossils now, and then maybe flesh that out with some wood and some plaster, and then drape the skin over. Really, I mean, for most of us, that makes total sense. And you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's how you get that body in place. It's something, of course, they really don't do now, but it led to that opportunity for those displays of more naturalistic animals. And even, you know, you take a study skin, you know, that stuffed with fluff animal, you add some wires to keep that skull in place, you add some more wires to lock those legs on, wrap it around a branch, and now you have something that, I mean, we could actually see this in a museum today as a display for a peregrine falcon. That's what this is, by the way. A young peregrine falcon, still wearing its brown feathers. And we can look at this animal and tell from this exhibit really a lot about it. You know, it's big enough, it's probably a female. Yeah. Reminder too, if you folks do have questions as we go along, I'm kind of speeding through this introduction here a little bit. Feel free to slow me down because I should be able to see the questions pop up on my screen if you do have it. The Victorian era, the 1800s, that's when we saw those more posed animals becoming more popular. Also, some really interesting things. If you've ever seen an exhibit of like little mice dressed in clothes, riding little mini bicycles, stuff like that, that was very in vogue in the Victorian times. You know, the dogs playing poker, painting. Yeah, imagine that was stuffed dogs. That was the kind of thing that a lot of folks were doing at that time. And I'm sure some of you out there, I can't see in your faces, but I'm sure some of you out there don't have very happy looks on your faces right now. The idea of mounting animals, human-like poses, and it is something that we'll see when we tour the collection and something we talk about quite often here. The attitudes over time towards wildlife and how we interact with wildlife have changed dramatically. I mean, they're very, very different than they were in the 1800s. And the novelty of it all, to have these human-like animals posed in exhibits and displays, was something that for a time was very, very popular. And really until the modern time, the Victorian era was probably the heyday of taxidermy. It's when people were making advances in the craft, when it began to be considered an art form, really. And people really strove to reproduce a lifelike animal from the remains of something that had died in the past. And in Europe, that went nuts. I mean, Europe really, as far as I can tell from my research, was like really the hub of taxidermy for most of history, at least as we're talking about the scientific study and exhibition perspective. Seriously, those questions, throw them in the chat. I don't mind. Now, towards the end of the Victorian era, in the early 1900s, taxidermy saw a big decline, especially that spectacle side of it. And it's kind of interesting. Some people think that the decline came from them getting too close to reality. So instead of, you know, the stuffed with cotton moose head kind of hanging on the wall, all of a sudden you had a bobcat leaping through the air with claws extended and the rabbit fleeing away from it, you know, these more dynamic diorama kind of settings. It kind of unnerved people. You hear it actually with robotics. They call it the uncanny valley, where you reach this point where a human-like robot just gets too close to human, and it messes with us. We don't like it, and it becomes much less appealing than that Robbie robot walking down the street. I don't know if that's 100% accurate or not, but they definitely, as that craft improved, the popularity knows that. So when Lumen Nelson, who was born in the late 1800s and really was getting going with taxidermy right around the turn of that century, he was becoming a taxidermist in a time when taxidermy was declining. And the techniques he used were really the techniques that were perfected in the end of the 19th century, which went away from the bones, went away from constructing that skeleton, and really were much more interested in depicting a natural animal, but using, you know, more flexible materials, I guess you'd say. Give you an example. I want to say first off, the specimens at the museum, and we have over 600 mounted specimens here, are in great shape. We do occasionally have some, I guess, not really in recent history, but in the past, they got a little beat up. This collection has been exhibited in many different ways since the 1960s. And, oh, look at that. Yeah, awesome, Brant. Loving that. Oh, it was a private message, though. Brant just interjected. He's a current taxidermist, and the taxidermist naturalist is still a thing. Absolutely. Didn't mean to say it didn't exist, but for the general public, you know, a lot of times we make kind of that false separation. What Lumen Nelson was doing as he was constructing his mounts is he was taking the skin and the feathers. In the case of this dove, again, this one's pretty beat up. We pulled this out of the back room. And rather than using the entire skeleton, he did use the skull, he did use the natural legs, but inside, let's see if you guys can see that, he built a wire frame and stuffed it with raffia, or kind of wood shavings, things like that. We actually had a fox mount that was retired recently that was full of old newspapers. So some sort of stuffing in there. Now, folks, some of you are probably thinking, how does this thing last from the 1930s without getting eaten by bugs, right? And what would happen, because that obviously was from day one, trying to preserve those hides to keep you warm in the Stone Age, you didn't want bugs eating your coat. So all those techniques to preserve the hide, the skins, have been passed down for a long time. And what often was done in the late 1800s, early 1900s, is they would treat all the materials with arsenic. Arsenic, yeah, I don't want to be touching this if it's treated with arsenic. In 1997, the collection was assessed and tested for arsenic, and no arsenic was detected. Quite likely, these were treated with borax. Borax was something else that was used to protect the materials, make them less appealing to insects. Collection wasn't tested for borax, so we're not sure on it. But you can see this wire frame in here, and he shaped all of these animals you're going to see today into the poses they're in, building that frame from scratch. A question just flashed by. I missed it. So unless it's really pertinent to right now, hold on and we'll get you at the end, okay? So let's see. I burned that. The taxidermy collection today that we're going to see was primarily put together in the 1930s. And Mr. Nelson started his taxidermy career probably around 1900. He did a lot of work. We've been told he did work for the Roosevelt family. And around 1930 or so, though, he started his own private project. And that project was to put together a collection of all the birds native to New England. He wanted to go out and collect, 1930s speak, that means shoot and trap, right? He wanted to collect those animals, mount them, and have an exhibit for people to see. And for many years, that exhibit was in a barn over in Winchester, New Hampshire. In 1996, Mr. Nelson came here to Hogback Mountain, where his friends, the White family, operated the Hogback Mountain store. They also had connections down the road with the ski resort, Hogback Mountain Ski Resort, and he arranged to have the collection here. And this is really where it stayed in different buildings on top of the mountain here, exhibited as the Lumen Nelson Natural History Collection. In 1997, the owner of the property at the time, because every time the property changed hands, the collection kind of came with it. The new owner of the property had no interest in the collection. He didn't want to hear, he felt it was taking up space that could be better used with something else, and started making inquiries to disperse the collection, sell it to whoever wanted it. A local man by the name of Ed Metcalf heard about this and made an offer to buy the entire collection and use, at the time, an abandoned bed and breakfast next door to exhibit it. Some wheeling and dealing, and the Vermont Museum of Natural History was incorporated by Mr. Metcalf. He then set about cleaning and restoring and reorganizing the collection into the basic layout we're going to look at today. That collection is not something you really could put together today. When Mr. Nelson started, the protections on native birds were pretty sparse. By the time he was wrapping it up in the 1960s, we were seeing some pretty solid wildlife protection laws coming into play. And all right, we'll come back to that. I saw that question, Jack. And today, to do this, you would need special permission from state and federal governments. If you did it on your own, you'd be in violation of many landmark conservation laws like the Migratory Bird Act. Jack asked if Mr. Nelson received any special dispensation to help him do this collection. Not to our knowledge. To our knowledge, it was his pet project. And while he was working as a taxidermist, he had this going on the side. And we've actually, a local woman came in one day and told us a story about her uncle who worked for Mr. Nelson on this project. And every fall during migration, he would send them out to like the classic bird watching spots, right? Go out to Rye Beach, go to Cape May, and they'd have a list of the birds he needed for the collection. And they would go out and attempt to, I mean, really to shoot them, honestly. We will see in the collection, we're not gonna like look at every mount today, but if you come and look, some of these were animals that were hit by cars, things like that, that came to Mr. Nelson and then he added to the collection. So what do you think, folks? Should we take a look? Look at the collection? Interesting not seeing your faces. So I'm going to take and swing the view around here. So bear with me while I figure this out. There we go. Oh, didn't work. We'll get it. Don't worry. Here we are. All right. So this is kind of where you enter the museum normally. This is the seabird room, we call it. this collection is composed of animals native to the Northeast. So you're probably not going to see, you know, something like gannets. Whoa, sorry, something went sideways there. You're not going to see gannets. Huh. Well, I guess we'll do it this way. In the collection, I mean, you are going to see in the collection. You're not going to see them flying around Vermont. Go. Sorry, guys, we're having some technical difficulties here. To be perfectly honest with you, I'd rather do this in person. Yeah, but anyway, and something too that's kind of interesting as we look here. We've got these common loons, and I like to stop at the loons because there's something going on here. Something that a modern loon biologist would right away roll their eyes at. Does anybody know what it is? What's wrong with these limbs? Just go ahead and throw that right in the comments if you know. Yeah, both the common loons and the winter plumage red-throated loons here. No? Nobody's gonna try? All right, I'll tell you. Loons can't stand up like that. Yeah, they're too front heavy. Their legs are too far back, which, oh, there you go, Bernadette. Yeah, exactly. They're standing up. They just physically cannot do that. They're built like torpedoes, right? The propulsion is all in the back. They're really much more water animals than they are land animals. And back in the 1800s, early 1900s, you know, we learned about animals by shooting them, taking them apart. And I kind of imagine people at the time probably looked at it and went, well, kind of looks like a penguin, and stood them up. If you see a modern loon mount, something done really after the 1930s, they're typically set in the top of the case. You know, there'll be an oval cut in the glass, and that loon will be sitting in it as if it were on the surface of the water. Just a little indicator of the age of the collection. Just it wasn't common knowledge. The biology of a loon didn't allow that. So we're kind of moving through here. We do have a number of live animals. There's Basil, our big friendly snapping turtle. Isn't he cute? Mr. Nelson was definitely a bird guy. You can see the beavers here. You know, I mean, they're representative of the size of a beaver, but really they're study skins. They are like literally stuffed animals, and not quite the type of thing you would see today. Which, why don't we go down here and check one of those out? Because he was primarily interested in birds, most of our larger mammals are not part of the Lumen Nelson collection. They're things that have been added afterwards, like our mountain lion here. And before you ask, no, she is not an eastern cat. This was an animal hunted out west, and then Ed acquired it after he took over the museum. But if you just listen here, just listen carefully. I don't know how that comes across, but if you guys can hear that hollow echo, today, taxidermy uses forms made of plastic or fiberglass, and most of those forms are very detailed. They have, I mean, right down to the muscle structure of the animal, which allows the taxidermist, and I know we've got at least one out there, so this was not a how-to do taxidermy, so please feel free to chime in if you'd like to contribute to that. But the modern taxidermist is going to use those forms and attach the hide to it in a much more realistic looking way than even Mr. Nelson's models that he was handcrafting. And then the work around the eyes and the mouth, I mean, it really is art. Some of the big taxidermy collections now, you go into these scenes that really look like live animals are in there. So here we have something that I just thought I'd take a minute to show y'all. What do they use for the eyes? Yeah, just the glass or plastic eyes. That was something that really, that's what they've used since the lifelike taxidermy started. This here is a passenger pigeon. Many of you are going to know a passenger pigeon. We actually have 3 extinct birds in the collection: the passenger pigeon, Eskimo curlew down below here, and then there's the heath hen. Yeah, and these 3 birds, with the possible exception of the curlew, were not collected by Mr. Nelson. They were given to him by the state of New Hampshire to help him complete his collection. He was interested in having these extinct animals, and the state donated them to his collection. Passenger pigeons, of course, I'm sure many of you know, were once the most numerous bird in North America, possibly the world. Billions of these guys used to darken the skies. Their flocks were so huge. And in less than 100 years, we wiped them all out. When we're talking to folks about the extinct species, we'll use that to really, again, return to that changing attitudes people have. Going from the passenger pigeon, who was really wiped out in many ways just through thoughtlessness, really. People didn't believe extinction was a thing, to the heath hen that was almost saved. People on Martha's Vineyard, I mean, had some bad luck, but they would have saved the heath hen, which was unheard of in the early 1900s. And then we'll come back to the mountain lion, who, although extirpated in Vermont, was an animal that today is protected and hopefully will one day come back in good populations. Passing along here. Some more live animals. Right now, the museum's a little bit more hands-off than usual due to the COVID stuff. We also have here, so here we have kind of those classic head mounts. Mr. Nelson went out west to collect these. How much would it cost for an extinct specimen? Boy, you know, I know that they've all been assessed, but honestly, I do not know off the top of my head. It would be something, though, that would be pretty heavily regulated. You're not going to be able to get that on eBay, probably. Well, I don't know, maybe those ancient extinct ones. An interesting thing with these head mounts, though, is we are trying to focus on the Northeast. We don't have elk like this in the Northeast. You know, we probably never had pronghorn antelope or bison, caribou like this we didn't have. But we did have woodland caribou and the eastern elk right up until the 1800s. So we can kind of see these animals that used to be part of the New England landscape, really probably our 2 dominant deer when the settlers first arrived. We have over 50 different songbirds that you can find in Vermont, including, I ran right by the hummingbirds. I want to show you guys little tiny hummingbirds. And then we also have the Vermont state bird. If you've never seen the hermit thrush, there he is. Yep. I don't know if any of you folks have been to the museum before, but if not, I encourage you to come take a more in-depth tour. We'll go down the next floor. So the question was, or the comment was, that some people believe that the mountain lion or catamount is back in Vermont. What's my opinion? I knew somebody was going to ask that question. The thing with the mountain lion, and actually here, why don't we do this? So here's the thing with the mountain lion. The eastern mountain lion that was originally here probably is extinct. It's been declared extinct. And think of what the landscape was like at the end of the last century. You're talking about 80% open farmland. People that had no tolerance for predators, game wiped out. You know, white-tailed deer didn't exist in Vermont for years. So the chances of a population of our original mountain lions still existing here, I think it's pretty safe to say almost 0. However, every state around us, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, they all have confirmed cases of mountain lions in the last couple decades. And the state reports about 40 to 50 sightings a year in Vermont that are good enough to investigate. And I don't think anybody now would say it's impossible. Do we have a population of mountain lions here? Probably not. But could you see one crossing the highway some night? Sure, I don't see why not. The animals that DNA have been collected from, like there was a cat pretty famously hit by a car in Connecticut, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. That cat came from the Pacific, or came from out west. It came from the Black Hills and walked here. They're pretty sure they had a match for him in the upper Midwest and in upstate New York. And the thought is that these cats we're seeing in the East are young males that are trying to find a place where there are no adult males to beat them up, plenty of food to eat, and girls. So they come east, no adult males, plenty of food, no girls. And they keep coming, and eventually they turn around and wander off. Kim, I just missed that question, but don't worry, we'll have time at the end for more formalized Q&A. And I don't know, some of you probably are ready for that. I'm trying to do this. There we go. And we're getting close. One of the, I guess, highlights of the museum collection, we do have all the species of owl you might find in Vermont. So if you're interested in birds of prey, you're going to get to see them all here. Some nice bald eagles. And we have almost all of the daytime or diurnal raptors. The only thing we're missing actually is an Arctic gyrfalcon that turns up here once in a while. And Mr. Nelson also reportedly was a big fan of the albinos. We have quite a collection. Some of you may have noticed as we've been going by, I've kind of breezed past some of them. Albino and leucistic animals, which you might simply call it partial albino, although it's a different mutation. We have not a bad little collection of those guys. And it kind of speaks to his desire to show people things that could be found here. And most of us will never see a live albino animal, partly because they don't occur that often, and when they do, they don't survive very long. And supposedly, he would hear about one and send somebody out to collect it, for the intention of us being able to see them today. These are very different attitudes than we have today about wildlife and about nature. Obviously, we wouldn't go running out to go shoot the next white-gray squirrel that's running around the woods. But it is something that allows us, because somebody did it back in the 1930s, it gives us a chance to see these animals up close. And I just kind of wanted to wrap up the tour portion here with something, our newest edition. We do periodically have people make donations to the museum and offer us some new mounts. We have here a bear that a hunter from New Hampshire just gave us. Take a look. You notice something kind of weird about this guy? Yeah, it's missing its front right leg. And this was a bear that reportedly weighed well over 300 pounds. It was a big bear. The missing leg was well healed. It was an old injury. And that animal had run around on 3 legs and not only survived, but thrived by all accounts. And when it was dropped off, the guy who had shot it, hunted it, and had it mounted, said that he wanted to mount it to honor the bear. That because that bear had survived so much, he wanted it to last. And that was an interesting sentiment. And it was something that I think today, as we look at a taxidermy collection, it's something that we can incorporate into this, that these animals do have a second life, and a little kid probably won't get this close to a black bear safely, and they'll have a chance to really look at this animal and get an idea of what kind of wildlife is running around the woods of Vermont, or New Hampshire, or Massachusetts, New York, really large expanse of the local region. And we hope that that is the value of this collection as well, to give people the opportunity to see what is outside and then go out and actually see those animals alive and experience some outdoor adventures that are really, really better, even than meeting the live captive animals. So I don't want to keep you all too late. I know we're getting close to dinner time. A few questions have flashed by that I missed. Do you all want to repeat those for me? Or, oh, yep, this is even better.
Yep, I'm going to jump in and I can go. A lot of the questions were coming directly to me for some reason, and it's probably just me not quite knowing how to use the technology right. But I want to go back to a few of those. Just now, Bernadette mentioned that we did have elk here in the Northeast. She says a subspecies called the eastern elk, but she thinks they went extinct in the late 1800s.
Yep, yeah, that's correct. And that's actually how we use that elk head, to talk about the extinct eastern elk. And then we also had woodland caribou here until the same time, the late 1800s. They actually tried to reintroduce woodland caribou to Maine by airlifting them to the top of Mount Katahdin, which apparently is beautiful habitat for woodland caribou there. And every one of those caribou turned its nose north and ran right straight back to Canada.
Kim asked, when you bring an animal to a taxidermist to be mounted, do they give you options for pose, expression, etc., or is it up to the taxidermist's own creative decision?
Well, I obviously can't speak for taxidermists, but I know there are, when you look at the forms that are used for these, there's a wide variety. And you'll also get taxidermists who will modify those forms to create their own shapes. Yeah, and Brant, the taxidermist, says it's up to the client, which makes the most sense. And actually that three-legged bear, one reason it was donated to us was it was not put in the pose he requested. So every time he looked at the bear, it annoyed him, that because he had that constant kind of reminder that that's not what I wanted.
One question that came up a little earlier when you were talking about, I believe, kind of the Victorian era, the heyday of taxidermy, was the question is, was there formal training or schooling for taxidermists back then? And same question about today.
You know, that's a good question. I would think 1600s, everything was what's the word I'm looking for? An apprenticeship program. So I would expect there was probably some. Also, the biologists of the time were using it constantly, so they probably learned that in university. Today, and I know Brant's going to jump in here, which is great to have an actual taxidermist on the line. I believe you can take courses in it today, but a lot of people are self-taught.
The Victorians did.
That's what I got. Yeah.
The Victorians did a lot of really weird things, I have to say. They're fascinating. We have at the Bennington Museum in our collection, we have like a hand fan with a taxidermied or stuffed, I'm not sure which, bird as part of it. And, you know, ladies had hats made with birds in them. Right. And it was just one example of many kind of fascinating art forms that the Victorians were into.
That's my one regret for not having a slideshow for this, because I was thinking that would be interesting to have some pictures of some of those more outrageous examples. Yeah.
Well, I'll send everyone links to, we have one or two pieces in the museum collection that I can share with folks. Back to the question about mounts of extinct animals. Would something like that primarily only be available to museums today? You did mention it was highly regulated. So, you know, would you have to be a museum to have access to something like that?
You know, as I said that, I got thinking about some of the, like the bird specimens and things that, sorry, Branch, yeah, okay, cool. He sent it to everybody, so you guys saw that. There are some incidents where really old mounts are grandfathered in. So if they existed before the regulations, it's a little different what the rules are for those. Yeah, and honestly, I'm not sure what the regulations would be around that. I would say that it's probably better to have them in some public forum where people can see and learn from them.
We feel that way about art too.
Absolutely. Yep. Doesn't do any good on the wall in someone's house.
Another question was, do we know any of the thoughts of Lumen Nelson regarding conservation and the contribution of his craft to fostering conservation?
Well, by the accounts that we have, he was very much into conservation, and the idea of having this collection for people to see, and it's interesting because it goes so in line with the mission of the museum as it is now, was to use that exposure to the taxidermied animals to encourage people to be more involved in the outdoors and in their local natural world. Which, I mean, that's really the cornerstone of our mission today, and it's my understanding anyway that was one of the reasons Lumen Nelson did it, was for that exposure and conservation value.
You mentioned to me at one point that the taxidermy is somehow connected to the formation of the Audubon Society. Am I remembering that?
Oh, well, it was your hats, yeah. When the feather trade in particular was very high fashion, it was a very wasteful trade. People would go in, feather hunters would go into, say, a breeding colony of egrets, shoot them all, pluck out the prettiest feathers, and then off they go to sell those prettiest feathers. And yeah, the Audubon Society was named for James Audubon by a group of people that wanted to put a stop to that. Yeah, and that was their first focus.
Bernadette wanted to let us all know that the Pember Museum, which is in Granville, New York, is
Yep.
that right?
Yeah.
Pember Museum has an exhibit right now called Furs, Feathers, and Fashion.
Yeah.
Probably all check that out. I'm
Nice.
sure they've got some great disgusting hats with birds on them.
And the Pember has a fantastic collection of mounts from all over the world. So whereas we're very focused on the Northeast, you want to see some cool exotic stuff, the Pember has a great collection.
I think they have a catamount, don't they? Maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Brant, our resident taxidermist here, and you may have already noted this, I'm not sure, actually teaches beginners taxidermy. So if we've got any aspiring taxidermists among us, we can connect with Brant. And he said that a lot of taxidermists are self-taught, but apprentice with someone for quite a while.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not really something that you would take a college course in, I suppose.
You used to be able to take mail order courses in it. Yeah. Like the Boy Scouts had a badge for taxidermy.
Huh. Well, I was as an undergraduate, I studied archaeology, and we studied animals as well, skeletal remains of animals. And I had a professor that had an extensive collection, but I don't believe he had any taxidermied animals. They were primarily skeletal
Wow.
structures. It was always really interesting. Are there any other questions or comments for Michael? I'll give everyone, I forget, people need time to type. So another question is can taxidermists today, are they allowed to mount any type of animal, or are there restrictions?
Yeah, there are restrictions, and I believe taxidermists can get licenses to broaden what they're able to work with. But for example, something is very relevant to us here. birds that are protected by the Migratory Bird Act, most taxidermists can't do either. So you couldn't bring a dead blue jay to your local taxidermist and expect that to be something that can be mounted because it's protected under Migratory Bird Act. Whereas you bring a duck that, say you shot during hunting season, then that's not protected by the Migratory Bird Act, and that would be something available. And endangered species, things like that, are going to be very heavily protected.
And if an animal is found dead of natural causes, or I'm adding to this question, if you like hit an animal with your car, killed it accidentally, are those types of things regulated also?
Yeah, because you even have like roadkill pickup laws and things like that that come into play. But say you hit a hawk with your car, it's still protected by the Migratory Bird Act, so you still wouldn't be able to have it mounted, even though it was killed by a car.
And if it was just found deceased of natural causes,
right,
same thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the main reason for that is you bring it in, you say, oh, I found it dead in the woods, but how do you prove that? How can, there are people that today still traffic in eagle parts and native wildlife, and you go out and shoot 20 eagles so you can sell the feathers. You could easily say, oh, they got hit by the wind turbine.
Right.
So they have to.
In the case of birds flying into windows and dying that way, it would be the same laws would apply, I would assume. Right. So if it was a bird protected through some regulation or another, it would not be able to be mounted, but I don't know how often ducks fly into windows, but if it was an unprotected species, you could then conceivably have that animal mounted.
And again, some taxidermists do have the licensing that if it's a legally acquired or legally possessed animal, like say if we have the permits that if we bring a dead blue jay into the taxidermist, that person can look at our permits and say, okay, you're legit, you can have it. And then if the taxidermist is also licensed, then we're good to go.
Gotcha. All right. I think that's probably it for our questions. If anyone has any other questions, oh, wait a minute, a couple more coming in.
It's always you say, okay, last question and 5 more.
It's people need time to type. It's a little different than being in person. I think I know the answer to this question. Do you take donations of dead animals at the museum? I know the bear was given to you already mounted. I'm not sure if this question is about already mounted animals or not, or both.
Well, I'm going to answer both. Typically, we shy away from taking the dead animal. Like we just found this raccoon hit by a car. We typically shy away from that. I mean, it might be something that we don't have that would be valuable to the collection, then we might make an exception. And kind of the same thing with the taxidermy. We're much more open to taking taxidermy. We actually just recently received a sandhill crane, which I wasn't here that day, and I got the call at home, hey, someone just dropped us off a sandhill crane. And I just kind of rolled my eyes, like, why? We're the Northeastern. But did you know sandhill cranes were once found here in great numbers and are recolonizing the East right now? So
interesting.
Yeah, I've learned something new with unexpected donation. They really are, yeah.
Is it against the law to possess a stuffed wild animal if it was killed, if it was from long ago? So for example, if it's a regulated animal now, but the mount is, of a certain age.
Yeah, well, that's where you run into the grandfathered specimens. Grandpa shot this great horned owl and had it mounted. It's been in my family for 3 generations, kind of thing. I am not going to attempt to tell you what those regulations are specifically, because if I get them wrong, I'll get in trouble. So those are regulations that are fairly easy to find. And if not, you can reach out to your local game warden. Those guys are usually really good about being reasonable with people who are being reasonable. So you've got an honest question and you're not trafficking in wild animal parts, they're gonna usually do right by you.
And probably if you're asking for permission, you're not trafficking in wild animal parts.
Right.
Well, great. Michael, this has been so very interesting. And like I said, we've recorded this program and we'll be able to share it with everyone. You'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel and website. Not immediately, it usually takes me a couple of days to convert things to the right format, but if you check back, you'll find it. And again, I encourage everyone to pay a visit to the Natural History Museum. Michael, what are your hours these days? Are you open?
Yep, these days we are open 6 days a week. So every day except for Tuesday. We are not open Tuesday. Every other day we're open 10 till 4.
Wonderful. And it's not terribly expensive to visit, if I remember correctly.
No, we actually need to raise our prices, so get here quick before we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's $5 for adults, $3 for kids under 12, under 5 is free. Seniors are $2.
Great. And,
Yep.
you know, it's been a couple of years since my family's visited, so we'll have to get back up there soon.
Yeah,
And
it's a different place, yeah, than a few years ago. Yeah.
and it's really, you know, they've got such a great live collection there too, that it's really fun to go there with your kids and check it all out and see up close some of the animals, particularly the birds. I think that you see when you're out driving around or whatever, but to be able to see them up close and really see just how magnificent so many of these animals are is really a neat experience.
Yeah. That was the thing we did not do on this tour. There's one more floor that you go down, one more flight of stairs, and the live animal enclosures are built around the base of the building. Yeah.
Great. So you have to go in person to see it.
All right. Good. Hope to see everybody around.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for having us back, Deanna. And yeah, we'll do this again sometime. Right.
All right. And thanks for everyone for joining us this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.